And welcome back. We are commencing our first segment this morning with a conversation with attorney Anthony Sylvestre. As we had mentioned prior to the commercial break, we're going to be discussing some of the lessons learned regarding the unfortunate incident involving Mr. Allyson Major Jr. And there's a lot to come out of this particular discussion, so we encourage you to sit with us as we go through some of the legal aspects of the matter. Good morning, Mr. Sylvestre.
Good morning. Morning, Sonny. Good morning, Marlene. Morning, Belize.
This is a lot to take in to begin with, yes, considering everything that has happened since that unfortunate incident at the foot of the swing bridge several weeks ago. I think perhaps what is most interesting in the minds of many is the outcome in terms of the charges that have been preferred against the accused officer. What are your thoughts on that from a legal perspective?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me this morning. Of course, because the matter is before the court, the corporal has been charged, and I do suppose the family will take legal action as well. So can't go into very much of the specifics, but certainly what we can discuss is and outline the process that would be involving a person being charged. As you, the law generally regards a death in two categories, and death which by natural causes and death by unnatural causes. When a person dies of unnatural causes, whether it be a stab wound, whether it be a gunshot injury, or any type of other harm, a crime could potentially occur. There are cases where clearly a crime has occurred, where, for instance, someone walks up and they fire a shot, and with no legal justification, and the person, the intended target is hit, and that person dies. So what the law then does is that the law ascribes that as a crime, and the death which ensues could be, the person who caused it, that could be criminally culpable in one or of three ways. They could be charged with murder, they could be charged with manslaughter, or they could be charged with a manslaughter by negligence. And if I may very briefly go through the series of these these charges. So murder occurs where a person causes the death of someone. There's no legal justification, no self-defense, or any other type of legal justification, such as, for instance, in execution of one's duty as a law enforcement officer, or protecting someone who that third party may themselves be in danger. So there's no legal justification why that person fired a shot or why that person caused the harm. And the person intended to, in fact, cause that harm, and the person intended as well to kill. And then there is manslaughter. Manslaughter occurs where a person dies. Again, there was no legal justification for the harm to have been inflicted, but proof of an intention to kill cannot be discerned, or would not be able to be established. And then finally, there is the manslaughter by negligence. This occurs again where somebody causes the death of another person, but the law regards the causal link between the harm and the death as being done negligently. Now, negligence law is where a person has a duty. They have a duty of care. So, for instance, well, we have example drivers on the road.
That's where we commonly hear it.
You have a duty to take care to not cause harm to other users of the road, whether it be another vehicle or whether it be a pedestrian. And so you breach that duty, whether you were texting, you were doing something which the law would regard as you're being negligent. You fail to fulfill that standard of care that is required of you as a driver on the road. Now, in the context of, say, a person, for instance, handling a firearm or in possession of a firearm, or or discharging a firearm. So certainly the law places an obligation on someone who has in his possession a firearm and who uses a firearm or discharges a firearm for them to exercise reasonable care to ensure that the general public or other persons, they're not injured by his or her conduct. But of course, what routinely happens is that when a death occurs, and I've been involved in a case where the person was the person is charged with murder, and if in a trial they're unable to establish murder, they're unable to establish that, well, there was an intention to kill, then what happens is that that charge falls down to manslaughter.
It's downgraded.
It's downgraded. And then if at the trial they're unable to actually establish manslaughter, then it falls down to manslaughter by negligence. So I suppose the concern and the issue is that, well, so you're starting with the lowest charge, and so what if that doesn't stick? You know,
then
what?
You have nothing.
Then you have nothing. So I suppose that may be the concern. Now, in determining what may be an appropriate charge, routinely, these are the things that I've found that that I looked at. Firstly, you look at the gunshot injury. Gunshot injuries, they vary. You could have what we refer to as contact injury. So the muzzle of the gun is placed to the body. You have close range injuries. You have intermediate injuries. That would be say where the shot is fired from 6 inches to 30 inches, and then you'd have what we refer to as distant injuries, gunshot injuries. So you'd look at that firstly. You look at also the number of shots that were fired, and of course that would be determined by way of expended shells that are collected near the scene. You looked at as well the projectile. You look at how it has traveled. So there is an entry wound, and you would also have an exit wound if the projectile leaves the body. And so you look at it. If, for instance, you have an entry wound which is in the same distance, it's parallel to the exit wound. So one may discern or one may surmise, well, that seems to have been a very straight shot. As opposed to, let's say, for instance, the exit wound is at an angle. Then one may question whether, you know, that in fact establishes an intention to cause that injury and to kill. You'd also look at, for instance, the experience of the persons, whether that person has a particular training and experience, you know. So those are some of the things which I suspect would go into consideration as to whether an appropriate charge, what would be the appropriate charge.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned something interesting, because I think we hear of the charge of manslaughter by negligence very often in traffic incidents.
Yes.
I want to ask, from your experience, how often is it that a shooting results in a charge, a shooting that results in death, results in a charge of manslaughter by negligence? Because there's certain requirements of people who hold a licensed firearm. In fact, it's very strict. I don't know how enforced it is, but what you can do, what you should do. Talk to me about that part.
Well, as I was indicating earlier, and I've been involved in cases where actually our defense is that the death was caused by negligence as opposed to having been intended or it being a case of manslaughter. But a lot depends on the evidence, a lot depends on the specific facts of the case. And so that it is difficult to make a general analysis as to say, well, persons who handle a gun, they could never ever be charged with manslaughter by negligence. Similarly, you can't make a categorical statement and say, well, a police officer who has or discharges a firearm can never be charged with murder or never be charged with manslaughter. It depends, quite frankly, on the specific facts of the case, and that would be borne out at the point when the police have collected all the evidence and they've provided, I suppose, what is referred to as disclosure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's important to note that it's not something that can be as cut and dry, because I think that's what the public wants to hear. There was a shot fired, which means it's murder. But take me back to another issue, because you've mentioned it quite a bit, but we didn't address it. What would count? What would make something justifiable harm? You spoke of the harm that is involved that leads to death. What are the circumstances for justifiable harm?
Well, the law allows a person to inflict harm on another person where they are, it's reasonably required for them to defend themselves or to defend someone else. So, for instance, you see someone attacking or about to attack Marlene with a violent instrument. You are within your legal right to actually defend Marlene, and if you were to inflict an injury and cause that person's death, you could avail yourself with that defense of self-defense. That would be legally justifiable. What the law does, however, is that it's not, however, all situation or circumstances where you would defend someone or yourself, it would be regarded as legally justifiable. So what they do is, what the law does, the law requires that your action or that it's proportionate with what was in fact actually done. So I gave a scenario of someone attacking Marlene with a violent weapon. So in a case like that, where say you seek to defend, and you have a machete,
hacking her.
yes, you're about to, and so you shoot that person. That would be legally justifiable. Contrast that, for instance, if the person is unarmed and the person is just about running towards Marlene, and you just take your firearm and you start shooting. And when the person dies and the police come and they actually search a person, he doesn't have no weapon or anything like that. So that clearly wouldn't be legally justifiable. And as much as you were seeking to do to do something noble, the fact is that somebody dies, but there was no legal justification for you to have inflicted that lethal injury. And so in those circumstances, self-defense would not be able to avail you. And so what may occur there, I think you may be able to, you at the very least would be charged with manslaughter.
May I ask this question? Because it's something that weighs on my mind when I'm looking at this entire scenario. Couldn't there have been perhaps a charge of reckless endangerment, considering the fact that you have an officer who is discharging a firearm out of a moving vehicle in an open area where you have pedestrians and other persons around? I would assume that maybe several shots were fired. One fatally struck Mr. Major. The others flew wide of that particular target, but could have caught anybody else standing around.
Well, as I indicated earlier, is that a little bit, I am unable to actually go into the specific facts of the case, so I'm not able to say or comment on whether those charges could or could not have been charged. I suspect the usefulness of this discussion is for persons who may or may not have been on the scene, and persons who may be privy to to other details. They may be able to form a more definitive opinion in their mind as to whether the charges were proper or not. But certainly, in a fact scenario where an officer discharges a firearm, again, you would have to look at the specific circumstances. Was he under threat? Did he feel as though there were persons, not only himself, but members of the general public who are a threat by that person or the individual or suspect that he was pursuing? And so what then would it have necessitated for him to have fired or discharged shots given those circumstances? So those are things which, again, you can only unearth if you know the specific facts. And at this point, we don't know the specific facts, and it would not be very helpful to engage in that in a public domain.
Is it safe to say, however, that a fleeing individual who is being pursued He's not returning fire or anything like that. That individual is fleeing, does not present any threat to
Yes.
whoever is pursuing him. There's
Yes.
no clear and present danger.
No, well, clearly, I mean, if someone is not is being pursued and they're not a threat, I mean, then clearly, if that person is fired upon, that would not be justifiable. You know, so that I mean,
Which puzzles me
as
because
clear
then, if it's not justifiable, then how do we arrive at a nominal charge of manslaughter by negligence?
well, you see, that's just the thing. I mean, I would not want to go into the specific facts of the
Yeah.
case because it is before a court.
Yeah.
The individual has been charged criminally, so that would be ventilated in a court of law.
Yeah.
And the family as well may wish to pursue a civil suit.
Yeah.
So it would not be prudent to discuss the specific facts. I know it sort of constrains their discussion, but so as to both the interests of the family and the individual,
Yeah.
it would be best served if we do not go into the specific facts of this case.
No, clearly, I think we're aware of what your obligations are as an attorney, and understanding that there are a lot of facts to be brought out in this case that we'll be privy to when that undertaking happens. But the purpose really is to perhaps take this scenario and make it become a teachable moment for any subsequent issue that may occur. Clearly, because this is a shooting between a law enforcement officer and a civilian, this is one of the highlighted cases. And it takes us back to what are the rules of engagement in what are our responsibilities, or what are we how are we susceptible as civilians when we are caught up in a case like this? So going back to the issue of the legal recourse, if in any other scenario, I am perhaps not satisfied with the charge that is being brought forward, what other avenues can I take?
Well, the law tries to, as far as possible, address many different circumstances and situations, and one of them is this, where, for instance, a person is charged with an offense, but the family or the victim may be of the view, well, you know, I don't think that is the appropriate charge or the proper charge. The law would allow for the charge which has been preferred, which has been laid, for there to be a judicial review, a legal challenge of that. So the family would go to court and they would have to show on a balance. They don't have to show with certainty. They would have to show the court on a balance. Look, you know, this charge is unreasonable in the circumstances. That it ought to have been manslaughter, murder, based on XYZ. And so, as you will appreciate, it will require that those facts to be in the possession of if a family or the family, if they were minded to take that road.
So the burden of the proof would be on the family or the victim who's bringing it forward.
Yes, I mean, but it is important to point out, of course, that legal recourse is possible, and that was affirmed in a decision from Jamaica, I think like about 10 or so years ago, because previously the thought process was that, well, once the police or the DPP, they make a charge, a lay a charge, that's it. You're unable to do anything. But then this case went to a case from Jamaica where you had an individual who had died, and you had this group. Don't remember the specific name, but they were like a human rights group, and so they, on behalf of the family, they assisted and they took the matter all the way to the then Privy Council and then the Privy Council laid down some guidelines as to what a citizen would have to establish if they were minded to actually make a legal challenge of a decision of the DPP having charged someone for a particular offense, and they are of the view that a more graver offense they should have been the charge.
Now, how difficult would it be to prove something like this?
Well, as I indicated, you would have to have in one's possession, they would have to have some evidence. At the very least, what would have to occur is that I think, well, no, so you would have to write a letter to the DPP, to the authorities outlining why, on behalf of the victim's family, they're of a view that this is a proper charge. And so, for instance, it could very well be that the victim's family now have a witness that may not have been willing to come forward, or the police themselves may not have interviewed that person. So with that information, the DPP's office, the prosecution's office, then would be obliged to reconsider. So, for instance, if you have someone saying, "Oh well, but we must say this," or "We heard the man saying this," or "We heard this," so those are things, because that, of course, those are considerations as well. You look at things that may have been said or done prior to shootings and stuff like that. So if you have that information, then certainly that would strengthen the hand of the victim's family in a case for judicial review of the decision that has been laid.
So that is a possible recourse that any victim or any victim's family can take if they're not satisfied with a charge.
Yes, and if I may, I have been approached, not in this case, but other cases where a family they feel aggrieved that, look, this person should have been charged with murder, not manslaughter or some other offense, and so those are the things which are explained, and so what invariably happens is that then the family, they have to go do an investigation, so they have to gather the evidence. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Now I wanna keep the conversation going, just looking at we spoke of the difference between the murder charge, manslaughter, and manslaughter by negligence. What we didn't get into are what are the possible sentences that can come from them, and the difference between them.
Well, in terms of murder is regarded as the most heinous of crimes that can be committed, and so the law, it's on our law books, but nobody has been, in fact, sentenced, but a person can be sentenced to death.
We still have it on the law.
We still have it on a law book. A person can be sentenced to death if he or she is convicted of murder. But what has been the trend is that death is only ascribed to what is regarded as the most heinous of crimes, of murders. So you would you would need to show that particular crime was the most gruesome or the most heinous, and so it requires a death sentence. And one of the things, however, that has to be done is that before the trial starts, the prosecution would have to indicate from the onset, to the defense and the judge, look, we just seek a death penalty in this case, because once it's not done, it cannot be sought after. Say if the person is convicted, and it turns out, man, you know what, should I really ask for the death penalty? You would not be able to have it or seek or ask the court to impose it at that point. And then thereafter, there is the range of sentences from life imprisonment and to what is referred to as a fixed term sentence. So the person is not sentenced to life. They know, for instance, that they will be able to actually come out of prison at a particular time, whether it be 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, or whatever the case may be. Because quite recently there was a decision from our highest court, which the CCJ, which said that to sentence somebody to life imprisonment is cruel and inhumane, because if you think about it, that person is in prison and he has no idea when he will be released, and so
no chance of reform.
And so that certainly has to be torturing and psychologically distressing and cruel and inhumane for anyone to be subjected to that. And so you're not saying that a person can't be sentenced to life. A person cannot or ought not to be subject to such a punishment, But again, it would have to.
You still have to define the terms.
You have to define the terms, but more so, you look at the specific type of how the crime was committed, how the murder was committed. It was committed extremely in a very gruesome way. Then that may warrant a life imprisonment, as opposed to, let's say, though the murder occurred in, say, maybe a situation where in a jealous fit of rage and a person kill another. Though, of course, it has to be appreciated that the taking of any life, has to be regarded as very, very serious. And I suspect the general public may view that, well, the law and the system, kind of, in a sense, take the killing of persons somewhat in a whimsical manner because of perhaps the sentence that is imposed. But what has happened over the years, there is this drive to have a balance between the rights of the victim and the rights of the person who is accused and as well who is convicted. Yeah. And I know that from the public generally feels though that we tend to seem to the system tend to seem to be skewed on the side of the defendant or the accused.
Yeah. Yeah. So you started off, so you said it could be life and any other fixed term that's determined by the severity of the crime itself and the circumstances. So in the case of manslaughter, what are the terms we're looking at?
Manslaughter, again, it could be life, but the court has set a range. Seldomly anyone would be sentenced to life for manslaughter. But the range is generally, say, between, say, 15 to 25 years.
Mm-hmm. And in the case of manslaughter by negligence?
In the case of manslaughter by negligence, the cap is 5 years. So the law provides a person is liable for up to 5 years. When the law allows a sentence in court, it gives a sentence in court at discretion, then the court could do a combination of things, could impose, say, maybe a fine, other compensation, could as well impose imprisonment, and so those are the different possible sentences that would
there's a perception before we go to the break. There's a perception that a charge of manslaughter by negligence, the way we think, is often a charge that is reserved for road traffic accidents and that sort of stuff, where the person gets a notice of intended prosecution, gets charged, sign bail, and you go about your business. It's the same notion that people have in respect of this particular case, where they expect that the accused officer will simply walk away from this scenario.
Well, that perception and mindset would arise because, as I indicated earlier, negligence is where a person has a duty or care, and if they falter, they've not lived up to that, and so it is true that generally that is found often in cases of manslaughter by negligence would be in terms of motor vehicular death, no, but there are other instances where it can arise, and it goes back to, I suppose, the perception that may be that is out there of I guess the legal system and particularly the criminal justice system, that, well, people generally may get a little slap on the wrist when a very grave crime has been committed. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how that has or that kind of can be changed, but it is a real perception.
All right, well, we'll continue this conversation, and I think one of the things that perhaps we need to discuss is perhaps just looking at the rule of law itself and understanding the police and civilian engagement. So we're going to tackle that after the break, so please stay tuned.
For over 20 years, Great Belize Television, Channel 5, has been the leader in award-winning local programming. We have also produced some of the best video commercials, documentaries, and live events for clients countrywide. And we continue to offer high-quality production services to maximize your advertising needs for your business or organization. From concept to completion, let us help you achieve your marketing goal by producing your commercial, documentary, graphic animation, live event, or even designing your website. Using state-of-the-art equipment and experienced personnel, we can make your ideas come alive. For more information, come see us on Coney Drive or give us a call at 223-0146 or 223-7781 or email us at gbtv@vtl.net. Great Belize Productions, making great television in Belize.
And if you're just joining us, we're having an extended conversation with attorney Anthony Sylvestre, talking about a number of issues. Before the break, we spoke of the differences between charges from murder to manslaughter with negligence. And of course, this is to help the public in being able to understand the recent case of Allyson Major Jr., but of course, other cases that we've seen as well, where there are issues between civilians and law enforcement personnel. Before I went to the break, I was talking about the importance of us understanding the concept of rule of law. And I know that that's a critical issue for us to be able to discuss, just so people can understand why it is a part of the process and a part of why we have this cynicism in the country that we do.
Yes. No, in our stream of consciousness, in our thought process, it is, as we were discussing during the break and previously, there is this this reality that people believe that, well, the system is unfair, it's unjust, and it works only if you have connections or you know somebody who has influence. And that is why the rule of law, the notion or the concept behind rule of law is so important, and why it is fundamentally important that in any system that it works, and it is seen to be working. The rule of law operates this way, that whether you are the king or whether you are the gardener, that you are subjected to the same law. And quite interestingly, I was fascinated. I was reading this story. Earlier this year, you had the Queen of England, her husband, Prince Philip. He was involved in a road traffic accident. So he was exiting his estate, and an incoming vehicle, they crashed into it. What is of interest and what was quite fascinating is that now this is the Queen's husband, and the courts and everything is the Queen's. And he was nonetheless subjected to the rule of law. The case file was sent to the Crown Prosecution Office, and they had to do an investigation and determine whether he should be charged criminally and all of that. So the point of the matter is that here it is that you have this individual who is regarded at the highest level, but he was subjected to the rule of law. And so in our society, if certainly, our viewers and who are watching and yourselves, we're like, boy, we only wish that we had such a system in our country where, everybody would be subjected to the same level of rigidity that the law ascribes to everybody. Because when it doesn't, it breeds contempt, it breeds frustration, it breeds resentment, and that leads in cynicism. And it also leads in person taking the law in their own hand, which we are seeing very, very pervasively in this country.
Yeah.
You have a lot of vigilante justice, a lot of persons that we hear of dying. In the streets, we hear of the stories of why they die, whether it is as a result of some revenge or some retaliation and something to that effect. And so this is why it is quite important that the rule of law, it seems to be very, it seems just it's a concept, but it's actually something that is ingrained in any system, any criminal justice system. You have jurists that would tell you that, look, that people obey the law and people operate in a system, not because they fear the consequences of the law, but they believe that the law is just. It's the justness of the law. That is why you and I and everybody else would comply with it. So, for instance, you take a scenario here at Channel 5. If all employees are treated the same and they are given the same privileges as everyone, then it works well.
Same privileges and consequences.
And consequences.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if it is to the contrary, then what starts to foment is a recipe for chaos and anarchy, which we see.
Because it would be premised on the fact that some animals are more equal than others in that animal farm context.
Yes.
Well, you know, and the larger issue here for me too is how it contributes to the vicious cycle that we see. Because we develop a level of cynicism. We talk of the animal farm scenario all the time. Some people see more, some people have more privileges, it appears, than others, or face less consequences, whichever way you want to look at it. But the issue here is that even if it's a perception, and there'll be many that argue it's just a perception, but if that perception continues to grow and fester in society, then you have people who don't want to engage in the court system and who will say, why will I even take my case to court if nothing's going to happen? I'm nobody. And that's somebody who has the means or the influence. Or why will I go as a witness if I know this is a case against a politician or a law enforcement or a well-known person, or even someone who perhaps has the means to retaliate against me or my family. So where we're talking about this cynicism, I think we can all agree it's not where we want to be ideally, but it has subsequent actions that only then deteriorates even the legitimate processes in the court.
When I was in law school, there was this famous quote that were taught that every law student knows is that justice must not only be done, but it must be manifestly and undoubtedly seen to be done. And when I first thought that, it didn't really make sense. But when you actually start working in the system, you understand that it's not only a situation where, for instance, a person is charged or a person is convicted, but people must feel as though the system is working and the system is just. If they don't, the result is, as you articulated, Marlene, this extreme cynicism which causes the breakdown in the system.
Which brings me to this, and I've tried my best to put this as clearly as possible, because at the end of the day, if we look at this Allyson Major story, the fact of the matter is that there will be civil action taken against the state. And once that becomes so, we the taxpayers are going to have to pay for the compensation for the loss of life in this case. And there is a very real possibility that the officer retains his job and gets back his full salary. But that comes at the expense of the taxpayer. So how do we then look at that system and say, that works for us? That doesn't work for me. I wouldn't, as a taxpayer, want to be part of the compensation of life for something that I wasn't involved in, where this individual, as we've said, acted negligently in the discharge of his duty.
Well, in days gone by, there was this procedure where public officers, if they were negligent or they caused loss to the government, they used to be a surcharge taken out of their salary or their pension and stuff like that. So I suppose reintroducing that certainly would go a long way, because people then would be made to account. Look, you know, you the cost the government $80,000 so that their pensions, you know, got no pensions. You work your 35 years. You don't have anything at the end of the 35 years to get because of your negligence and of your
egregious as it gets.
So you see, it's not as though there are not mechanism in the system that can't be put to work. You know, it's just that I think overall there seems to be like a complete breakdown, and those are the things, because certainly I mean, if that were being done from way back when, I'm sure people would be much more diligent in execution of their duties, because who would want to work 30 years and then not have no pension? So you would be extremely diligent in the way you execute or carry out your duties. So certainly I think that something like that can or ought to be reintroduced, and the general public will advocate for things like that being done.
Yeah. You know, when we look at this scenario especially, and I think that when we were talking about the rule of law and the breakdown, the cynicism and how it contributes to what we see as a breakdown in the system, there's also another element here which I'd like to address, and that is the public's perception of the police department. The reason this is such a critical case and why people are paying attention and feel perhaps that this charge is unjust is because it is a member of the police department that fired the shot that killed Allyson Major. Now, there's two parts to this. One, I have said this repeatedly on this show, there are good cops and there are bad cops. And let me tell you something, anything that happens to us, we will call the police because we all want to be protected and we want to know that they can effectively execute their duties. And if it's my life, that it will protect mine or yours or my loved ones. But then at the same time, when we hear stories like this or other cases of police brutality or where people feel specifically targeted by the police department, it is very difficult for us to continue to have that level of trust in the system.
Yes.
And so we can't separate, and I know we can't get into the specifics of the case, but when there is a law enforcement officer involved, clearly the public will be paying more attention and they want to know exactly what you said before. It's not about just kind of tokenism, okay, here's a charge, but that it is being done justly from beginning to end. There was a special investigation team that was put together, and this is what has been the result.
That's why it comes off to me, forgive me, it comes off as a joke that we would have this special inquiry into this matter and that's all they can come up with is a manslaughter by negligence case. I mean, again, maybe I'm the one that's being cynical here too, but I fail to see where perhaps much thought and much work was done into putting this all together.
And your cynicism and your reaction is justified. I think what happens at times is this, is that the police, and justifiably so, they say, look, our job is extremely dangerous and risky and we're providing a service to the community. But I think at times what they forget and they don't realize is that, but it's your job, you know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is not a service, this is not volunteer work.
You
offered.
You suit up for this and stuff like that. So it's not as though you're doing us, as you say, a favor. And I think that is what is lost quite often with you have good police officers, but quite often many may take the view in a very very arrogant way, that like, look, but we don't need and so I think that has to be tempered, because as you rightly pointed out, there is this particular case, I suppose, is one of many that many Belizeans could come forward and they could speak about injustices that they may regard to have been done at the hands of police. I always try to keep a balance, though, because at the same time, as you indicated, Marlene, they're good police officers, and the service that they provide is extremely necessary and important. So what to my mind seems to be required is, I don't know if they have the time or if they have the resources to do it, but certainly a lot of post training from after they've left the training school, that has to be done. It has to, because what I suspect happens is that you graduate from training school and you enter a very rough and a very cruel streets that you have to work in. Yeah. But that has to always be balanced with what was your main focus. And unless you have post training and continuous training, that is lost. And I think that may be quite that may be one of the main problems.
And it's a valid point, because I think a lot has changed. One, I think the recognition of the knowledge that civilians have of their rights.
Exactly.
Even if they allow it to be violated, they also know that they're being violated. Secondly, cell phones that can video anything and everything that takes place. I know people who use a dash cam because even if they can't get their phones out, they're gonna have video on their vehicles. So the engagement is a lot different, and I've always wondered, I know teachers have to go through licensing processes, and this month, while everybody thinks they're on holiday, they're actually in workshops learning to go back into the classroom. Doctors have continued professional development. I don't know what the standard is for attorneys, but are police officers going through that? Are they going back for a refresher every year to understand even sometimes the societal issues that are taking place, or to refresh them on human rights, or what is the proper protocol when you are in a high-speed car chase in the middle of downtown Belize City, and what is appropriate action or not appropriate action?
No, you're all right, because I would think like probably more 80%. I mean, I find quite a lot of police officers, they feel insulted and enraged when you would want to video and you'd ask them.
But they can profile you by videoing you.
So,
or if you ask them the name or the badge number, or
that mindset clearly has to be as a result, as you point out, a lack of appreciation that things have changed, and so that can only be met or if there is continuous education. As I said, perhaps, well, clearly there is not the resources, and so the Ministry of National Security and they clearly, I think, would do well to start to have that aspect be introduced. No?
Let me take this back, because I think, again, focusing on teachable moments here. If I am a civilian and I come in contact with a police officer, tell me what my boundaries are. Because we also want to be responsible and talk about what our responsibilities are if we are being questioned, if we are being pursued, if we're being asked to be pulled over. What should I do and what shouldn't I do from the legal perspective?
I saw a very interesting and very useful tips that the Human Rights Commission they put out the other day, which was very informational. That a person is allowed to tape a police officer who's supposedly carrying out or executing his duty, whether they're doing a search or a stop and search, or whether making an arrest. That allows and provides for accountability, so a citizen can later on make, and I would want to think that a police officer would want that, because then a citizen cannot later make allegations against him or on chance me and stuff like that. So you have documented.
So what can I ask? I have the right to video this search?
Yes.
Can I refuse for them to search me?
No, you can't refuse for them to search you, but you have a right to ask what is the basis on which you have been searched. And of course, you know, it's quite easy and much more easier to say these things here, because in the heat of the moment, you know, you're traveling 10 o'clock at night, you're going home and there's stuff a vehicle. We know the scenario won't be as nice as it is right here. So it's and that is and that's why I understand where Isani and you're going from. That is why it is, I guess, the cynicism is there, because at 10 o'clock at night you go home, just outside of Belize City, and I stop your vehicle. You seek to exercise your right to say, look, I'm a video you and
because
stuff like that.
Plant nothing for me.
Nothing for me.
Right?
You know, I'm sure, you're not sure if that would go down very well.
No. I think we have to be honest. We've heard clearly from people that, listen, you could talk about that in theory, but I'll be the one to get beat up, or persecuted in some other way.
But the thing too, though, is that, look, if the department, for instance, is moving towards equipping officers with body cam, then the flip side of that coin is that I should be allowed to record you as well. And then that provides for clear transparency.
And that is, you are not transgressing on their rights as police officers, because it's a public space, it's a public domain, and you are ensuring and this provides for accountability.
So, and I hear what you're saying, and I hear this all the time. We get the feedback, and I meet people on the street and say the same thing. Yeah, that sounds great, but when you're out there and in a searcher, you can't really do it. But we have to counter with education and awareness. And people, while knowing your rights doesn't always make it easy to empower yourself, at least knowing it, sometimes it can help. And
Yes.
I've often said to people, if I pass and I see somebody being searched and it doesn't look like it's going right, I have the right to video it too. So maybe the person who is the victim doesn't feel empowered enough, but that's when we can be your brother's keeper and assist in that way as well. So you can ask the officer why they're searching you.
Yes.
You can video it if you so choose.
Yes. As long as you, the mode in which you are videoing would not be obstructing them. So you.
Okay, so if they tell you put your hands up and you can't move your hand,
yeah.
as my cameraman is pointing out to me here, see some of the logic here.
Yeah, or for instance, if you, yeah, I mean, so those are some of the unfortunate things that occur. But as you were saying, and I take that point, but the educational aspect of it to the public is a useful, does serve a useful purpose. I remember I went away to study law 20 years ago. At that time, I never knew nothing about no constitution or anything like that. Now, the general public, so everybody understands and knows what the constitution is. So it's a gradual process.
Yeah.
And it's a unfortunately, while the process is occurring, it's also a painful process for many of us. But I think the educational aspect of it does help the public, and it does allow, because once you have everybody knowing their rights, the law enforcement personnel would have to give way at some point. You understand me? They would have to give way. They would have to yield to this to the public demand that they respect these basic rights of individuals.
Yeah.
You see?
So, what's your? I mean, you're involved from the opposite end. Oftentimes, if these things go to court, but what would be your advice to people in terms of just the most important part of their own rights that they need to know?
Yes. So, we wake up each day, expecting that certainly we would live, to see the end of the day and until tomorrow. And so, when there's a loss of life, particularly for someone who you have no idea that their family had no idea, family members, and that their life would end in such a horrific way, such a cruel fashion, and unfortunate set of circumstances. It does cause a lot of unease and a lot of frustration and an anger towards the system. And I think certainly what needs to be done, and it has been said before, they have to have continuous education for police officers. And I think, I don't know how they will do it, but the police department needs to re-engage the public and let it not seem as though it's only lip service, because right about now I think people believe that it's lip service, that the settings and not really happen. And that's a bad state of affairs when you have the general public, they have that view and a perception of our law enforcement authorities, and so the quicker something can be done. I don't know what they intend to do, but certainly I gather that simply charging somebody and just for charging sake, without there being any substantiveness in a charge, that rather than causing the public to feel as though something is being done, it leads to cynicism and make people believe that, well, just the puppy show us. No? So I think if it wasn't made clear, I think you guys made it very clear today on behalf of the general public.
Well, we do appreciate you coming in, and I know there is a sensitivity in being able to talk of the issue without talking about the actual case itself, but it really serves, as we said before, an opportunity for us to learn from the process as well. And we appreciate you coming in and sharing your expertise.
Thank you for inviting me once more.
All right.
All right.
We're going to go ahead now and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the New River and the issues that they've been seeing there. Please stay tuned.